Before we start our discussion for this week, let's recap very briefly about what we achieved from last week. So we introduced to you the idea about the first refinement model for the bridge controller. So what did we do in the refinements? So number one, we actually introduced 3 new variables for the concrete state space. We got A, B, and C, right? And number two, we actually introduce some redefinition or overriding of, I quote, the inherited events from the abstract model, namely the ML out and also ML in. Those events actually exist in both the abstract model and also the refinement model. So somehow they actually got 2 versions of their guards and also actions, namely the abstract version and also the concrete version, right? And also number 3, we also talk about the possibility of introducing new events, which we haven't seen. That will be the topic for this week. But let me just recap a little bit further. And for the concrete state space and also the concrete events, ML out, ML in, we spoke about how we can prove that the refinement was actually valid by considering 2 kinds of proof obligations. The first kind is guard strengthening, and the second one is about invariant preservation. So for each one of them, we actually spoke about how you can formulate the proof obligation using a sequence, and also how you can prove the sequence. We did many things together. Hopefully you have followed the details. And of course, I assigned quite a good number of exercises to you, because the number of sequence that may be generated, for example, from the invariant preservation, is quite a large number. For example, we talk about 10 different possible 10 different sequence you can actually formulate for the invariant preservation, because you actually got 2 concrete events and also you got 5 concrete invariants. So that's why you multiply them, you got 10. We only did 2 of them, so the remaining 8 will be up to your exercise, right? Just make sure you attempt at least some of them. Just make sure you can actually do it independently. All right, so let's now continue with our storytelling of the first refinements of the bridge controller. And we want to talk about the introduction of new events. And we got the notion about the new events or concrete events over here. And just remember, we said before, always be reminded that the way you actually simulate or execute a model is really by thinking of it as an abstract state machine. You got different transitions, and the transition may be enabled in a particular state if its guard will evaluate true. Pop quiz. What if there's a state where all the events are disabled for their guards? What's that situation called? Deadlock, right? That's something you want to remember. That's something we spoke about maybe about 2 weeks ago. You don't want to throw that away, right? That's very important system property that we will actually want to ensure deadlock freedom, right? And also, of course, the invariant should be preserved as well, right? For any kind of events, either the events already exist in the abstract model or the events only got newly introduced in the concrete model. So all of them should really preserve the invariant. Invariant is really the priority for your machine to always preserve. That's why they call it invariants. They should not be changed for their truthfulness always. All right, so we already considered about the concrete and also refined events from last week, right? Namely ML out and also ML in. I would like to clarify some terminology right away very quickly together with you over here. So here you can see we talk about concrete refined events. Here we talk about new and concrete events, right? I think the word usage over here is being very careful, but I want you to see the subtle differences over here. Okay. So there are 2 kinds of events over here we're talking about, right? So we talk about events. Okay, let me write it down. Okay. So you can think about we got abstract model and also we got refinement model, right? So we got model M0 over here, and also we got M1 in our case, right? M1 of course refines M0, and whatever events we actually introduce at the level of M0, we call them the abstract events. And in our case, it will be ML out and also ML in, right? So we call them abstract events. When the context is actually clear, we may just call them events, not really abstract. But now, since we talk about M0 and M1 all together, so we should really call it as abstract events. The abstract version of the 2 events, ML out, ML in, right? But the story will be slightly more complicated when we try to refer to events in the refinement model, right? So let's talk about what we said last week. ML out and also ML in, somehow they are inherited from the abstract model. You can use the inheritance analogy which I mentioned last week. You can think about these two events are simply inherited to the refinement model over here, in which case you can choose to redefine or to overwrite their definition, either the guard or the actions, right? And of course, for the guard, you want to make sure you only strengthen the guard in the concrete level, right? That's why we got one of the proof obligation being guard strengthening. That's about the guard. And for actions, right? Let me just, I think it might be good to summarize about what we said last time, right? Let me just put it here. Right, so number one, their guards should be strengthened, which means they will entail their abstract guard counterparts. And number two, their actions should change concrete variables. Right, that's something we showed earlier. And how do we refer to these two events? Either we can refer them as concrete events, or we can refer them as events if the context is actually clear, or we can say it's a concrete version of these two events. So these two are the abstract version of these two events, right? So that's about the what we said so far. And the complication will be added when we talk about new events. So let's now talk about the two events we're going to introduce this week. So it will be called ILin and also IL out. I will explain what these two events really mean in a moment. But for now, let's just see how are we supposed to refer to them. For these two, they will still be considered as concrete events, because their actions are supposed to also modify the concrete variables, right? Because concrete events, because they're supposed to actually also modify the concrete variables. So that's why they also call concrete events. However, we can also refer to them as the new events. Either this or this, right? So that means when I actually refer to an event as the concrete events over here and over here, right? That means I might be referring to either this kind of events which got inherited from the abstract model, or I might be referring to this kind of concrete events which got newly introduced into the refinement model. So you will have to make sure the context is actually clear to you which kind of a concrete events I'm talking about, right? So new events are concrete events. However, concrete events may not necessarily be the new events, because concrete events might be referring to the inherited events from the abstract model, right? Hopefully this visual illustration is very clear to you. So from now on, whenever I refer to any one of them, you should really know what I'm talking about, right? Let me now go back over here. Right, so let's now talk about the new events, ILin. So IL over here stands for the ILin. Okay, so the ILin, remember we got the ILin, we got a bridge, and also we got the mainland. That's really our abstraction is about. Right, let's now talk about this event. Well, I deliberately actually leave the guard and also the actions unspecified. That's some exercise I would like you to do, and you can confirm your answer together with me. I think that would be nice for you to really try to do things about the design for the events rather than just be given the design and take it for granted. Right, so what's the informal meaning for ILin? ILin denotes the occurrence of a car entering the island which gets off the bridge. What does that mean? Let's take a look. And let's now look at this diagram over here. We already spoke about one single occurrence of ML out talks about a car going from the mainland into the bridge. And we talk about ML in talks about a car going from the bridge into the mainland, right? So these are the two events we spoke about. Now symmetrically, let's say there is a car on the bridge over here, and a car actually wants to go to the island. That should be represented by one occurrence of ILin into the island. And let's say there is one car in the island, they want to go back to the mainland. So they need to actually they want to exit from the island and then get on the bridge. In that case, it will be represented by one occurrence of IL out, right? That's pretty straightforward, right? Let me, oh, that's good. And let me just mention one thing that's very important for you to understand, because that will impact upon how we actually design the guards for one of the new events. So let me just make it a little bit bigger so you can be more focused over here. Okay. So what I want to talk about is, let's say there is one car over here. Let's say there is one car starting from over here. Oh, actually, let me say from the beginning over here. If I actually got one car over here that actually wants to go to the ILin. If I have one car over here that actually wants to get off the bridge and go to the ILin. And as we know, it's going to be denoted by ILin. Okay, over here. And then, so that will be the event occurrence. You should know that for every such occurrence of a single car, there should be a corresponding earlier occurrence of out, because this car here cannot just appear on the bridge magically to begin with. The car must come from the mainland over here, right? So that what I meant was, so there should be a corresponding occurrence. Let me use a different color over here. Corresponding occurrence of out, meaning that the same car is actually leaving the mainland and goes onto the bridge and heading to the ILin, right? So that's just the corresponding occurrence. So that'll be the out. Even though there are different events over here, so but you should know that this car over here is the same car as this one over here, right? They are the same car. What I want to say is, whenever you got any ILin over here, there should be a corresponding out for the same car, right? You want to actually keep that in mind, because later on when we design the guard for the ILin, we have to have this particular observation in our mind, so which can simplify our guard design. Just keep that in mind. We'll reach there very soon. Alrighty.